It was a simple family, one of those families you don't see in the newspapers, who don't have wealth, but who hold in their hearts what truly matters. Their home was modest, made of weather-worn walls, with small cracks that told silent stories of struggle and endurance. The roof, often battered by rain, was supported not only by wood but by the faith of those who believed that, even in the face of life's storms, there would always be a new dawn. Maria was the soul of that home, a devoted mother. She found her greatest reason for living in her children. There was no luxury, no abundance, but there was something infinitely more valuable: love. Life was never easy for her. From an early age, she learned to face difficulties with courage, like someone carrying a heavy burden, but walking without ever letting go of the hand of those she loves. Faith was the invisible thread that sustained each step, each dawn. It was like a small but constant flame that illuminated the darkest days. In that house, routine was made up of simple gestures, and it was precisely in these gestures that the true greatness of life was hidden. The smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the kitchen, bringing a sense of welcome. The window that creaked when opened, as if it were the old guardian of that family's secrets. The children's laughter echoed in the yard, mixed with the sound of the chickens, the wind blowing on the clothesline, and the dog that always ran after any shadow. These small, seemingly ordinary scenes were the foundation of happiness, because, for Maria, every moment was precious. Every glance exchanged, every unhurried hug, every kind word spoken amidst difficulties was like a treasure stored in her soul. But there was something even greater than all these things, something that sustained everyone when the days became too heavy. It was hope, the hope that, despite the world's pain, nothing could shake the love that held them together. It was this certainty that made Maria believe it would always be worth starting over, even when her heart bled with exhaustion. Maria dreamed of giving her children what she had never had: security, affection, a dignified life. She believed in their future like someone planting a seed in dry soil, confident that one day the rain will come and make it bloom. There were nights when, sitting on the edge of her bed, she would stare at the ceiling and pray quietly. She would pray for her children, pray for strength, pray that God wouldn't allow her pain to overwhelm her faith. At those times, the silence of the house seemed to hear her prayers. And in the morning, even though she was tired, she would get up and repeat her usual rituals. She would light the stove, make coffee, straighten her children's clothes, and encourage them to never give up. She said, "What sustains life is not what we have, but what we carry within us," and they believed it. They believed because they saw, every day, the example of that woman who, even though she had almost nothing, offered everything. Time went on, and life, though hard, seemed stable. Neighbors saw in that family a picture of simplicity and love. But what no one knew is that destiny was already preparing something unexpected. That home, so full of faith and hope, would soon be shaken by a pain that seemed impossible to bear. A pain that would test every prayer, every tear, every certainty that Maria carried in her heart. And this is where the real transformation begins. For what seemed like just another story of loss would soon reveal itself to be an experience capable of transcending the limits of reason. A letter, a simple letter, coming from a place that logic cannot explain, would change everything. Are you ready to hear what happened next? But destiny is made of surprises that hurt us, surprises that don't ask for permission, that arrive like a strong wind capable of tearing out the deepest roots. It was on an ordinary night, seemingly like any other, that the life of that family changed forever. The house was silent, only the distant sound of crickets and the rustling of the wind through the cracks in the window filled the night. Maria was preparing to sleep when the news came like a bolt of lightning, shattering every shred of peace still remaining in her heart. The eldest son, Ju, had left suddenly. No one was prepared. No one ever is. That morning, the home that was once sustained by laughter and hope was filled with a cruel silence, a silence that weighed more than any words, a silence that screamed. Maria's cries echoed through the hallways of the house. The other children, not fully understanding, wept along with them, and each tear seemed to carry a piece of life forcibly ripped away. It was as if time had stopped, as if everything had lost its meaning. The following days dragged on in an almost unbearable emptiness. The sun rose, but it no longer brought warmth. Mornings, once joyful with the children's hustle and bustle, became slow and heavy. The smell of coffee, which once symbolized welcome, now brought only painful memories, as if each aroma were a cruel reminder of what had been lost. The nights were even worse. The silence became unbearable, and Maria, lying in her bed, felt the weight of absence. It was in those moments that his heart screamed questions that echoed without answers. Is he okay? Does he miss me? Is there really something after death, or does it all end here? There were nights and nights of prayer interrupted by despair. She knelt beside the bed, trying to find strength, but tears wetted the words that couldn't reach the end. It was in that moment of extreme pain that a memory emerged, like a whisper in his soul. It was a phrase he had read in the Gospel according to Spiritism, a book that had been resting on his shelf, but which now seemed to come to life in his heart. Family ties are not broken with death, on the contrary, they are strengthened for eternity. That phrase echoed in his mind like a promise, and for a few moments, Mary felt a gentle relief, as if John were there, saying, "Mom, I didn't leave. I'm just somewhere else." But at the same time, the emptiness remained. Because faith consoles, but it does not erase longing. And the more days passed, the more Maria's heart seemed to bleed. She would find herself walking through the house and suddenly imagine she heard Jude's footsteps coming through the door. Sometimes she thought she heard his laughter in the distance, or glimpsed a shadow that reminded her of his presence. But she only had to turn her head, and nothing was there, just emptiness. This emptiness became part of her routine, an emptiness that sat at the table during meals, that accompanied every prayer, that lay beside her every night. The weight of absence was so great that, at certain moments, Maria questioned her own faith. If there was a God, why allow such pain? If love was eternal, why did the human heart seem so small in the face of longing? The suffering was not limited to Mary. John's brothers also bore the pain. Their conversations were interrupted by long silences, teary eyes, and memories that hurt just to be spoken. There were times when the house seemed to be suffocating, and it was in this suffocation that Mary clung desperately to that phrase from the Gospel. It was like a ray of hope in the middle of an abyss. She repeated in her mind, "TIs are not broken. TIs are not broken," but deep down, there was still a doubt that gnawed at her. What if it was just an illusion to soothe suffering hearts? What if, deep down, death was just the end? These questions were like open wounds that never healed. And it was precisely at this point of extreme pain that something began to move, something that, until then, Maria could never have imagined. Because what was about to happen wouldn't just answer their questions, but it would forever change the way he saw life, death, and love. A simple letter, coming from where reason cannot explain, would be able to transform all that pain into unexpected consolation. And that's exactly where our story begins to reveal itself in its greatest depth. It was then that something extraordinary happened. A day that seemed ordinary, like so many others in which pain insisted on being company, turned into a milestone impossible to forget. That morning, the sun rose timidly, filtered through the heavy clouds. Maria, as usual, had risen early. She made coffee, but her energy was gone. The simple act of lighting the stove and filling the kettle felt like a chore. Her eyes still bore the marks of a sleepless night, when memories of Ju invaded every thought. Suddenly, an unexpected sound interrupted his routine. A firm knock on the door. It was the postman. Maria was surprised. She wasn't expecting any correspondence. Even more so in that period, when almost no one wrote letters. With hesitant steps, he approached and picked up the envelope. Her heart raced for no apparent reason. Something inside her told her there was something different about that moment. As he opened the envelope, his hands began to tremble, and then, his eyes fell upon something that seemed impossible, a familiar handwriting, a stroke that his memory could never mistake. It was a letter, signed by Ju himself. For an instant, Maria felt the ground disappear. Her legs weakened, she was short of breath, and she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. It was as if the whole world had stopped. The letters were unmistakable. Every curve, every detail. It was his way of writing. And the words, oh the words, couldn't have come from anyone else. With teary eyes, she began to read, "Mother, don't cry for me anymore. I'm still alive, just in a different form. I'm fine, at peace, and I ask you to take care of our home. Love is greater than death, and one day, we will be together again." With each sentence, a whirlwind of emotions invaded his heart. First, unbelief, then, the astonishment, and finally, a comfort that seemed impossible to feel again. Maria put her hands to her face and cried, but for the first time since John's departure, her tears were not of despair. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of reunion. It was as if somehow her son had crossed the invisible border of death just to soothe her heart. The memories came back like a movie. His smile, his childhood games, his caring way with his brothers, the way he said "Mom" with unique tenderness. And now, all of that was confirmed. Nothing was over. But at the same time, a question kept echoing in his mind. How was that possible? Who could have written such a personal letter, with details that only John knew? The envelope had no return address, just his handwriting, clear and crisp, as if it had just come from his own hand. It was real. Maria felt it in every fiber of her being. It didn't matter what the world said. That was John talking to her. The impact was so great that Maria had to sit down. Her heart was pounding, but paradoxically, a gentle peace filled her soul. The pain that had previously suffocated seemed to give way to something new, something that could not be explained in words. A thread of hope was reborn within her. In the days that followed, Maria kept the letter close to her chest. She slept with it in her hands, as if it were a piece of Jew she could still touch. She read and reread each line, and with each reading, she felt her faith grow stronger. And for the first time in a long time, he began to look at the sky no longer as a distant, cold ceiling, but as a bridge that connected the visible to the invisible, the body to the spirit, pain to consolation. This experience opened Maria to a new perception. Perhaps life was much more than what met the eye. Perhaps death was not the end, but merely a passage. And deep down, something told him that this letter was just the beginning, that something even bigger was about to happen. Because Mary's consolation would not come only from that mysterious letter, but also of the revelation that was on its way. A revelation that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who heard this story. Later, Maria discovered something that left her even more surprised, and at the same time, deeply moved. The letter she had received had not arrived through the usual mail. She had been psychographed by a medium, a simple man who had never seen John, who had never crossed that family's path, was the instrument used to bring those words into Mary's hands. And that was exactly what left her breathless. How can you explain that someone you don't know could write such intimate details about your son's life? How can we understand that that medium had reproduced expressions, memories, and feelings that only Ju could have said? The sentences carried an unmistakable tenderness. It was as if Ju was there, dictating every word, whispering every memory, every emotion into the medium's ear. There was no doubt. It was his presence that overflowed from those lines. Maria reread the letter countless times. Each reading was like a new hug, and little by little, her heart began to open to a truth that until then had seemed too distant. Death had not taken her son. He was more present than ever, present in moments of silence, in dreams, in small signs that previously seemed like coincidences, present in the strength that sustained her every morning. And in that moment, Mary understood that life did not end in the tomb. That love was an eternal bond, capable of crossing invisible borders. That faith was not just comfort, but a key to seeing beyond the pain. The letter not only brought peace, she turned Maria's pain into purpose. She who before could barely stand up, now felt the strength to move forward. He began attending spiritualist centers, seeking more understanding. He read, studied, asked questions, and with each answer he felt his heart warm a little more. The Gospel according to Spiritism, which was once just a book on the shelf, now became an inexhaustible source of comfort. She recalled a passage that seemed to have been written especially for her. Death is nothing but the liberation of the spirit, which leaves the body as one leaves behind a worn garment. These words resounded in his soul like a song of hope, and little by little, Maria began to transform her pain into a mission. She realized that there were other mothers like her, mothers who cried every night, who wondered if their children were okay, who carried an emptiness impossible to explain. Then Mary began to comfort them. He told his story, showed the letter, and repeated firmly, "They are not gone. They live. Love never ends." And seeing the woman's eyes shine with hope, she understood the purpose of it all. The pain was still there, yes. The heart still felt Ju's absence. But now, alongside the pain, there was also light. What seemed like the end turned into a new beginning. What was once just longing has become a mission of hope. Maria no longer walked alone. She felt that Ju was with her every step, supporting her faith, showing her that love is the greatest force in the universe. And so, what had begun as tears of despair now blossomed into tears of gratitude. But the story didn't end there, because, with each encounter, with each new sign, Mary discovered even more proof that life is eternal. And what seemed impossible, talking to someone who had already left, became more real every day. What happened next made it clear that the letter was just the beginning of something even bigger. Maria was never the same again. That simple woman, marked by pain and absence, discovered something that completely transformed her outlook on life. She understood that love does not die. That longing, although it still hurts, can be a bridge of connection, an impulse to move forward, and that death, so feared by so many, is not a full stop, but just a comma in the infinite history of the spirit. For a long time, Maria believed that her life had been split in two, before and after Ju's departure. But as he held that letter in his hands, he realized there was something greater, an invisible, unbreakable bond that time and distance could not erase. The nights, previously marked by tears and silence, were now filled with a new sensation, the certainty that Ju was still alive, present, following his every step. In the small details of her routine, Maria felt his presence. In the wind that swayed the curtains, in the unexpected smell of coffee, in the vivid memory of a smile, Ju was there. And in the process, she learned that pain doesn't disappear completely, but can be transformed into light. That suffering, when illuminated by faith, becomes a school, and that each tear, when offered to love, becomes a source of comfort for other lives. The Gospel according to Spiritism became his traveling companion, and one phrase in particular never stopped echoing in his heart: "The true death is that of selfishness, not that of the body." These words taught her that the death of the body is not the end. The true end would be to let love die, to abandon solidarity, to close in on oneself. And that is why Mary decided to open herself to the world, offering others the same comfort she had received. She began visiting mothers who were mourning the loss of their children, bringing their story as a balm. He showed the letter, repeated every word, and said firmly, "Love is eternal. They live on." And seeing the eyes of those mothers shine with hope, Maria understood that her pain had found a purpose. What once seemed like an incurable wound was now a path of light. Today, when Mary looks to the sky, it is no longer just longing that she feels. It's gratitude. Gratitude for having loved. Gratitude for continuing to love. Gratitude for understanding that love is the bridge that unites worlds, the visible and the invisible, the earthly and the spiritual. The letter from beyond was not just a written message. She was living proof that life goes on, that there is no definitive separation for those who truly love each other, and that love is stronger than death itself. Maria, who previously felt lost in the void, now understands that her son has not left. He just changed his address, and that one day, at the right time, the two will meet again. Until then, she continues living with the certainty that life is eternal and that, in every gesture of love, Ju remains by her side.